Give me a minute and let's talk about the utter insanity that continues in Avdiivka. And I want to try to expose one of the reasons that this is so insane, what the Russians are doing here. The first thing, so if you take a look here on the deep state map, you can see those little red arrows. Those all indicate forward movement or attempts at forward movement, attacks by the Russians. I added that blue arrow, which is way out of proportion, right? It should be the same size as the other ones. But there is late word that the Ukrainians are counterattacking. It looks like in an attempt to get the forces up there around, what is that, Krasnohorivka, in a pocket and cut them off from the main force. Because that's the force that keeps committing suicide. And there's no other way to say it. I mean, it's insanity. It's complete insanity. They just keep throwing themselves into their own graves. And there's no other way to say it. And here, I'll show you why, right? This is what might not be clear to people, what these guys are up against. What you got to remember is that this part of Ukraine has been at war for 9 years, right? Since the Donbass separatist movement that the Kremlin created artificially here in Ukraine began. This is where the most intensive fighting has been. And so therefore, the Ukrainian ground is the most fortified of anywhere in the country. Now take a look at this fortification. And you can Google this yourself. This is the Terracon. And it's tough to see from the satellite image. But if you imagine that what you're looking at is a 25-meter tall, about 100 feet tall, slag heap. There's coal mines around here, and one of the byproducts of coal mining is slag. Anybody that grew up in Pennsylvania or has driven through Pennsylvania knows about column dumps, what we call column dumps. And they're just these big black blights on the landscape left over from coal mining. Well, the Ukrainians turned it into, I call it the Ukrainian Masada. If you know the story of the Jewish freedom fighters who held off, I think it was 900 Jewish folks on this mountaintop, held off 15,000 Romans for about 7 years or so. And because up there on the top of their mountain, they have everything they need to live. And getting up that mountain is suicide, period. End of conversation. From up here on their mountain, Terracon, all that's below them are open fields. There's some tree lines, right? There's some forest a couple kilometers away. But for the most part, it's just open fields. And from 100-foot elevation, about 25 meters, what you've got is you've got clear line of sight for all your anti-tank missiles, for your machine gun nests, for your javelins, for your man pads, for whatever you have to fire upon the enemy with. You've got a clear line of sight for 5 kilometers in every direction. And so today, once again, the Russians launched another offensive. 3 columns of armored vehicles came at the Terracon. You can see 2 of the pathways there. There was a third pathway to the north that did get the Russians about 200 meters of ground. They cleared that second field before the railroad tracks of the mines that the Ukrainians had laid, it appears. And they've been successful in finally reaching that tree line at the railroad tracks. But that's it. Everybody else has gone to their eternal reward to the tune of 16 BTRs, 15 BMPs, 7 tanks, 1 MRAP, and some other armored vehicles. And here's the evidence. None of these vehicles, BMPs are like ISVs, are like Bradleys, troop carriers, armored personnel carriers, maybe with some guns on them. Every one of these vehicles is destroyed. Every one of these vehicles is destroyed. So those are the two columns represented by my map, both completely destroyed. And those numbers are not done yet because the Ukrainians are still counting. They're still counting. I don't know anything. I don't know anything about warfare. I don't know anything about international politics or peace negotiations with terrorists. But I know this is a bad idea. I know that this is not going to work. I know that the Ukrainians that I speak to every day here in Kyiv are not going to settle for anything less than getting their country back. And all the lies the Russians tell to justify this kind of slaughter of their own people, they don't hold any water. They don't hold up to any scrutiny. They're not rational. We're dealing with a force that is not rational and is not driven by reason. Therefore, it cannot be reasoned with. And this is the only solution.